Yeah, so I will talk today about benchmarking the performance of Nest. I work as a Nest developer here in Norway. And so we have been using the Phoenix infrastructure a lot with our performance or our benchmarking on Piz Daint. So I will share some of my experience with you all today. So I thought I would start by talking a little bit about what the Nest simulator is. Not all of you maybe know what it is. So Nest is a simulator for spiking neural networks. It focuses more on the network system, the size, the dynamic, the structure of the neural system, more than the exact morphology of the individual neurons. So it doesn't focus that much on the shape of the neurons, but it focuses a lot on the network system. It is written in Python and in C++. So one of the key requirements of Nest is that it should be fast and memory efficient. We actually hold the world record for neural simulation from 2014. At least I think it's still the world record. What we have is from 2014, where we simulated a network of 10 to the 9th neurons and 10 to the 12th synapses on the K computer in Japan. So a very, very large network that we simulated in 2014. Nest has been under constant development since 1995, so for 25 years. So you can imagine how the code base has expanded a lot since that time. We have an active developer community who helps us develop the simulator. You can add your own models, your own connectivity rules. If you find mistakes and you are able to fix it, you can help us fixing those problems. And we are also, of course, always developing and trying to improve the simulator ourselves. So because of this, it is under constant change, and we need to make sure that everything that we used to be able to do, that we are still able to do those things, that the new stuff that we add are work as they should, and that we keep the performance as we have had it, that kind of stays consistent with our previous versions. Another key requirement of the Nest simulator is that it should work on models of any size. So you should be able to run a network on your own laptop, and you should also be able to run it on supercomputers. So we need to make sure that the Nest is optimized for both laptops and for supercomputers. So here, for instance, you see two very, very different networks. One maybe that makes more sense than the other, but here on the left-hand side, you see a very simple neural network that I have just created using the Nest desktop, where a neuron is connected to a Poisson generator for noise, and the neuron is also connected to a voltmeter to extract the membrane potential, and you can see the membrane potential in the back. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the multi-area model, which is a lot bigger and which you need a supercomputer to be able to run. The multi-area model has different areas. That each area has a lot of neurons, and they are interconnected, and there are also a lot of connections between the different areas. So this is a large neuron, and to simulate the entire thing, you will need a supercomputer, as I said. Yeah, so all in all, it is very important for us as Nest developers that we are able to test the simulator, and that we are also able to benchmark the simulator. We want to test it to make sure that all the different aspects of the simulator keeps on working as it should. And we want to benchmark the simulator to make sure that our performance doesn't suffer when we add new areas to the simulator. Things should be able to run just as smoothly today as it did yesterday. So that kind of brings us to why I started benchmarking on Piz Daint and why my team started benchmarking on Piz Daint. I work a lot on connectivity on Nest, and so we needed to benchmark connectivity. Other developers of Nest benchmark other areas of the simulator, and I focus a lot on the connectivity aspect. Yes, so we chose to use Phoenix, and we have been very happy with that. So I have a little timeline for you all, so you can see kind of our road for all of this. So we started in October 2018. We applied for access on Piz Daint, and we got it quite quickly and started benchmarking not long after. Then in September 2019, we applied for an extension on the same machine and got that as well. And then now, a couple of months ago, in August, less than 2 months ago, we applied for an extension on Piz Daint, but we also applied for resources on Yusuf and on the CM machines. Yeah, so I will go through all of these different periods with you. And we'll start with the first one. So we got started by sending in an ICEI application for HBP resources on the 23rd of October 2018. We applied for 25,000 node hours on Piz Daint, and this we received on the 12th of November 2018. And then on the 20th of November 2018, we got access to the machine. So it took just a month for us to to get access to the machine. It was very, very quick. The application itself was also very easy. The document was easy to fill out, and it was quite a nice experience, I thought. Yes, after receiving access in November, we used a little time to kind of set up our system, and then we started simulating and receiving results in around the middle of December. So all in all, very good. So we used the Jube benchmarking environment to run our benchmarks. I'm a big fan of Jube. It's a framework for creating benchmark sets to run the benchmarks in different systems, to analyze the results, get the results. You can set up different files with different parameters, shell commands, system dependencies, and a lot more. If you have parameters that are set for different systems, you can have one parameter file, for instance, set for different benchmarking systems. You can have one parameter files and then just update the parameters in this file, so you do not have to go through all your different files and update one parameter. You can update the parameter once, and then that is used for all your different benchmark models, for instance. So it makes it quite versatile and quite robust, and it makes it easier to not make a mistake, though of course mistakes can still happen. It's also very nice that you can run your sets benchmarks with the Jube. You can also analyze and extract the results. So you can do basically everything with Jube, which I find it makes it very easy for me when I do my benchmark, that I just do everything through Jube. Yeah, so I wanted to show you how we ended up structuring our files. We have two main folders, one with all the benchmark files, all the benchmark models, also all the result files. This is also where we have our Jube files. So all of that is contained in one folder. And then in another folder, we have our Nest source code, our build and install directories, and also the benchmark output files and the analysis files. So it's kind of divided between the two. When we sat down to kind of figure out how we should benchmark Nest, we had a lot of requirements. We needed quite a large set of benchmark to benchmark the different aspects. So we needed models that use PyNest, which is the Python API of Nest. We needed models that are distributed in space, because with Nest you can have networks distributed in space, but you can also have networks that are kind of just one point in space, not where it doesn't take space into account at all. So we need to benchmark both of those two different cases. We wanted to look at our HPC benchmarks, because these have a long history of benchmarking. We know how the output should look. We know how the kind of what we know a little bit about how our network should look and what kind of spiking data we should receive, etc. So if we get output from this benchmark that looks consistent with how it has looked previously, we know that our benchmarking system is set up correctly, I guess. We also needed to benchmark a lot of realistic models to see that makes sense, and we needed to check different connectivity rules, because, as I said, I focus a lot on connectivity in my benchmarks. So the benchmarks I have used have focused a lot on connectivity. So I'll go through our 4 different types of benchmarking models very quickly with you guys. The first one is the HPC benchmark. It's a traditional benchmark. It has 2 population model. It's a 2 population model, and both are connected to themselves and also each other. It is very easy here to switch the connectivity rules. And as I said, it has a long tradition as benchmark. We created a model called the population model as well. This one uses PyNest, so we are able to benchmark the Python interface as well. It is more realistic, though it is not based on the brain at all, but it has a constant times 20 populations, and each population contains 5,000 neurons, and then you connect each population to 100 random populations. So instead of having these 2 populations that are just connected to themselves and others, you have a lot of different populations that are connected to other populations. Then we have some of our realistic models. We have the multi-area model developed by Smith et al. In 2018 was the first paper there. It represents the visual pathways. This one was the one I showed you earlier. It has the 32 different areas, each with 8 population, and it is a quite large model. The same with the 4x4 mesocircuit model developed by Senk et al. It has 8 population in 4 cortical layers. This one is distributed in space, so you get the spatial aspect as well. And again, quite a large benchmark. When we run our benchmark on the machine, we run the benchmark from the scratch folder. We use Git to transfer the results to and from the machine. I analyze all my results on my laptop, so I need to get the results from the machine, and I need to get the benchmark models and stuff to the machine. So we use Git to do this. We settle on something called Gnode, which is basically the same as GitHub or Bitbucket or any of these other sites, but Gnode stands for the German Neuroinformatics Node. We chose this because it has a focus on data management, and we do sometimes create a lot of data, so that was quite nice for us. And it's also developed for neuroscientists, so that's also a plus, I guess, but it wasn't that big of a requirement, but it's very nice. So each time I run a benchmark, I go through these 5 steps, and it's very easy. It's gotten quite automated for me now. So when I want to run a benchmark, I make the modifications to the benchmark scripts to be able to check what I want to check. I submit the benchmark job using juberun, and then when the benchmark is finished, I collect the benchmark output and condense that to CVS format. So I do that by calling jube analyze and jube results. Then I commit the report files and I visualize the results using Jupyter Notebook. So all in all, quite easy. During this first allocation system, we focused on weak scaling. So we used 1 to 32 compute nodes. Each compute node had 36 virtual processes each, and we used 6 threads per MPI rank because the compute nodes we used had 2 times 18 core CPUs. For each of the benchmark, we had a base scale S for a single compute node, and then this base scale was scaled up to create a model that was bigger relative to the number of compute nodes. So you can see it here in this picture where the first we have 1 compute node and it has 36 number of VPs and it has a base scale of 20. And then when we go up to 2 compute nodes, number of VPs are 72 and the scale is 40, the benchmark scale. So that was kind of our process for all of the different benchmarks during this first year. We had quite a lot of challenges during that year, and some of these challenges we still have. It's very difficult to keep track of all the different runs, versions, results. We use the different hashes of Nest for the different versions, but how are the different hashes related in time? How do we distinguish between benchmarks that are very similar but just a little bit different? This is a problem that I'm still facing. I've gotten a lot better with the names, but I still find it difficult to keep track of the different Nest versions because I do test a lot of different Nest versions. Another problem we had was that we generate a lot of output with these benchmarks, and it's kind of difficult to decide what should be kept. Should we just keep the results in CSV files, or should we also keep all of the benchmark outputs? That would be very difficult to go back in time and kind of distinguish between all of them. And is that really helpful at all? These are also questions that we are still discussing a little bit. We have gotten a lot of help from the CSCS email, support email. They were very quick when we had any questions, and we received useful recommendations. So that was very helpful for us. Maybe not with the difficulties I just outlined. They can't really help me there. I think that with the system and difficulties on Piz Daint, I always received a lot of help there. Yes, so now I want to tell you a little bit about our different approaches to the benchmarking and how we worked. We did a lot of different benchmarks. We worked in a lot of different ways, and I will go through some of these ways to kind of show you how the simulator was improved by our resources on the machine. So I will start by telling you a little bit about this type where we bisectioned to locate performance regressions. This started out by this plot that we have here on the left-hand side. We checked different versions up against master at that time. So we have this Nest 214 orange line, and then we have 5G that came after 214, and then master here in green, and performance has clearly worsened. So we need to figure out where the performance got worse so that we could correct that. The way we did that was by sectioning by hand, basically. So testing for a lot of different benchmarking, a lot of different nest commits. We needed to try to find out where the jump had happened, and we tried to do it as with normal bisect method, though I did need to do it a little bit manually because with these working branches, not all of the different hashes work or commit will build and stuff like that. But we did actually manage to, in the end, find out what was wrong, and we could correct that so that our performance was back to how it should be. We didn't manage to get it quite down to where we wanted it to go, but we got it a lot better than what we had. So that was very nice, and it was quite fun to kind of get closer and closer to the actual problem. So it was a lot of fun, I thought. Another way we work is by identifying use cases for things that we need to improve in the future. And here we have two of the models that I talked about previously, the HPC benchmark and the population model. And when we compared the two, we see quite clearly that the population model has quite worse scaling as the number of virtual processes increases. This is something that we need to look into, as the population model is more realistic, and we think that is the way the simulator is going. So we need to kind of improve this poor scaling, and that is actually something that we are working on this period. So we identified the problem during the first allocation period, and then we are working on it now during our third year. We have also debugged large network threading errors. This was a problem that we only saw on large-scale benchmarks, so we didn't see this on our local machines. We needed a supercomputer to detect the problem and also then find what was wrong. I won't go into much detail about what was wrong, but you can see here that this blue one is not similar to the orange, green, and red areas, and it should be. So something is clearly wrong here. This graph represents spikes. We did test a lot of things. We checked out all the usual suspects, and then when we tested different scales, we found that this have a huge impact on the system. So all of these different colored areas are for different scales, and for a scale of, I think this was maybe 5 for the purple ones, the errors kind of got quite big. So we understood that it was something to do with different scales, and that is also why we didn't detect this on our local computer, because we needed smaller networks to be able to run it on our local computer. So that is why we only detected it on the supercomputers. And in the end, we were able to find what was wrong and correct that as well. So that is no longer a problem in the simulator. Yes, during this first allocation period, we had a lot of activity, and we were able to contribute a lot to the simulator. We had a lot of Phoenix-enabled pull requests for this first allocation period, 8 in all. It was very fruitful for us. Here you can see the other ones. When it came to the second allocation period, we had more of one goal in mind. We had this NEST 3.0 release, or not release, but version in our minds. So we sent our extension ICEI application on the 15th of September 2019. We received 20,000 node hours on Piz Daint, and we received those allocation on the 15th of October 2019. So again, it just took a month, very quickly, very easy application process, and we were able to resume our benchmarking very, very quickly. So that was nice. The focus on this during this period, as I said, was this pull request here that you can see, this pull request 1282 introducing NEST 3.0. It was a very large pull request. It was the accumulation of 2 to 3 years work. It touched almost every single file in NEST. It had a lot of changes back and forth. It represents, it introduced new ways of representing nodes, which is why it touched so much of the code. It restricted how we created, connected, and communicated with NEST, which is quite vital for our simulator. And for that reason, it needed extensive benchmarks. So we had been testing this for a long time, and we tested it continuously while this pull request was being reviewed, and we continue to test now after it has been merged into master. So during this period, we continued with our weak scaling setup from the first period, again using 1 to 32 compute nodes, but we also did a lot of strong scaling experiments. Here we usually used 1 to 128 compute nodes. During this time, we did a lot of benchmarking to avoid performance regressions. We didn't want our changes to weaken the performance of Nest. We did a lot of testing within the changes we had made. This is what you see here on the top results, where we have tested a lot of different versions of the Nest Free branch against the latest release to kind of see that we are on track, where if we have performance regressions, where that started, and yeah, just how it is looking. And then if we see that something has gotten worse, we try to fix that as quick as possible. We also test quite regularly against previous versions of Nest. That is what you see here on the bottom of the page, where we have all the latest versions, and we test the latest versions of Nest to those previous versions of Nest, previous released versions of Nest. During this time, we also had a lot of challenges during the second allocation period. One of our biggest problems was that the Nest API changed a lot during this time. So we needed to update our benchmarking scripts a lot. It was difficult to kind of we couldn't have just one benchmarking script for all the different versions. We needed different benchmarking script for the different versions. A lot of the time we changed something in the Nest code. I forgot a little that we had changed that, or it took some time before a pull request got merged, so it took a little time before it came into the actual Nest code. And so I ran a benchmark with the newest master or the newest version of the branch, and then suddenly my benchmarks didn't go through anymore, and it was because we had changed something. And then I needed to go through all of the benchmarks and change to make sure that the benchmarks would go through. This is something that we are still experiencing, actually. Just about a week ago, I had to go through all of our benchmarking scripts, because what used to be called a spike detector is now called a spike recorder, and that is the spike recorder is used in a lot of our benchmarks. So yeah. Another challenge we had was that the modules available on Piz Daint changed during this period. The older modules were no longer available on the machine. This was a problem for us, first of all, because I then had to upgrade all of my dependencies, kind of make sure that all of them that I was able to build a Nest, and that worked as it should, but it also made it very difficult to have consistency in the benchmarking process. When I benchmark Nest and compare it to an older version, I need to make sure that everything is built on the same modules, that those are the same. I can't have different Python versions, for instance, when I compare different benchmarks, because then I don't know if it's that the change between the benchmarks come from the changed Python versions, or if it comes from changes in Nest. So I need to have as much as possible to be consistent. And when older modules changed, or when they disappeared, that was no longer the case, of course, and I kind of had to run a lot of my benchmarks again. During this time, I ran quite a lot of interactive jobs to try to debug the problems. I had some problems building Nest, and it was very useful to be able to run interactive jobs during this time to see which modules worked better than others. So this is something I still use quite a lot when I try to debug problems on the machine, or if I just want to test something out very, very quickly. I use these interactive jobs. So during this second allocation period, we had still some pull requests that came through, and this 1282, that was the main big one that we worked a lot on during that time and that we managed to get through. We are now into our third allocation period. I won't talk too much about that, but we are kind of changing it up a little bit based on our experiences, and also now that we have so much experience on the machines, we can work a little bit differently, I think. So again, we sent our extension ICEI application on the 25th of August 2020. So just over a month ago. We received those allocation on the 4th of September, so it was extremely quick this year. What was kind of different this year was that we know we didn't just apply for resources on Piz Daint. We also applied for resources on Yusuf and on the SIA machine. The reason for this is that we do not want to optimize Nest for just one machine. We want to be able to have Nest optimized for different machines. We want it to run smoothly on as many machines as possible, and so it's important that we make sure that we have not optimized for just one machine, but that we have kind of tested and made sure it works on several machines. This period, we will continue with our weak and strong scale benchmark. We will use quite a lot of time with setting up our benchmarking system on Yusuf and on SIA. We will continue to kind of try to check that masterwork as it should, that Nest work as it should. We already have some results from this time. We haven't set up our system on the two new machines yet, I have to admit, but we have continued to benchmark on Piz Daint. So one of the things that we have been able to do is check this new connection routine that we have created. So we have changed the way we connect a little bit, and we have done quite a lot of benchmark on that to make sure that that works as it should. That pull request is now merged, and we also have seen that there is some regression in the way current master now sort our connections and exchange information about the connections, and that is something that we need further investigation on. But it's something that we have now identified and that we will try to look into further. Yeah, and this is the pull request that I talked about on the other slide, where we have changed the way we connect a little bit. So for we have a lot of things that we want to do now in this next year and also further on. I would like to make our benchmarking system more automated than it already is. I think that would be nice, and I know it's something that can be done with Jube. But that is more for me. Maybe what is more important is to set up our benchmarking system on Yusuf and at CS so that we can start testing in multiple systems. That will be very helpful for us. And then during this allocation period, we are also working on a new connectivity scheme. The pull request I just showed you is part of that, but it will be extended, and it's based on this plot that I showed you previously on the population and HPC benchmark, where we will try to make sure that this poor scaling is not is taken care of, so that we get better scaling when we have a lot of different populations and a lot of different connect calls. So that is something that we are currently working on and hope will bring some fruits. I think it will. But yeah, so that is basically what I had for you today. So if you have any questions, you can ask away.